Welcome back to OneDeepVoid, and a huge thank you for subscribing and hitting that like button. Tonight we're venturing into the paranormal realm of hospitals, so grab your favorite drink, get cozy, and remember, be careful what you wish for. You never know who might be listening. Let's begin. I want to share something that happened to me when I was little. It's the only experience I believe was paranormal that's happened in my life. I've only told my family and some friends about it. This happened when I was about 9 years old. We were involved in a severe car accident on a highway. We had gone out with my uncle, my brothers, and me for a day trip and were on our way back when it all happened. I was asleep in the backseat of the van when, apparently, my uncle dozed off and we veered off the road. He managed to get back on the road but crashed into a passenger bus. When I woke up, I was in a lot of pain and a paramedic was already attending to me. I was outside the van and couldn't understand how I got there. I saw many injured people and some had died in the accident. They started asking me questions, but I was very confused and kept losing consciousness. I didn't have any ID with me and couldn't even remember who I was with at the moment of the accident. For some reason, I kept asking where my dad was even though he hadn't come with us that day. I was put in an ambulance with another person who seemed unharmed. From what I was told later, they were taking the more seriously injured victims to the nearest hospital, so I ended up being taken to a small clinic in a nearby town where the accident happened. When we got there, the place looked more like a pharmacy than a clinic because it was so small and seemed deserted. It took a few minutes for the door to be opened, and the doctor who opened it looked like he had been asleep when we arrived. It seemed that they didn't have many emergencies in that town, or at least that's what I thought at the time. The doctor first checked the vitals of the man who came with us, and after a few minutes, the man left with an officer who was there to take him back to the accident site. The doctor was surprised that I only had some very minor bruises after hearing how I was found. After they checked me, a police officer who had come with us to the clinic asked for my name and who I was traveling with. He calmed me down because I was scared of not being with my family and said not to worry, that he would go back to the accident site and find them. The doctor stayed with me a bit longer and then took me to a room. There were 3 beds, and he told me I could rest there until someone came for me. Without saying anything more, he left me on the bed next to the door and closed the room. He left the light off, apparently not to wake the woman who was on the bed at the end of the room, 2 beds away from mine. I tried to sleep, but was very scared for my family and couldn't stop thinking the worst. Suddenly, my attention shifted when I noticed the woman in the room started to sob. With the dim light coming from the window in the hallway, I could see her lying on her side in a fetal position, wearing a blue hospital gown. There was silence for a few minutes, and I started to fall asleep when I began to hear a conversation in the hallway. For some reason, the lady started to cry louder, almost as if she wanted to be heard. The people outside the room went silent, but the woman kept crying. I decided to turn towards the wall, but I started to worry about the woman. I turned to look at her and saw that she was now sitting on her bed. It was dark, but I could clearly see her silhouette. She turned to look at me, and for some reason I preferred to close my eyes, perhaps embarrassed that she would see me watching her cry. Pretending to be asleep, she stood up, and I heard her bare feet walk quickly to the bed next to mine. In fact, it creaked a bit when she climbed up and lay down there. I could hear her breathing very close to me, and she started to cry again. It sounded very close. The beds weren't that close to each other, but for some reason, it felt as if she was maybe just a few inches from my face. After this, she turned around, and I could hear her settling into her bed, giving me her back. Then I opened my eyes for a moment. There she was, with her back to me on the adjacent bed. I could only see her wavy black hair and her blue gown. A few seconds later, she began to cry very loudly and moaned a lot as if in pain. I asked if she was okay, but she didn't answer. Suddenly, 2 people were talking outside again. I got up and went to the hallway to ask for help, thinking they might be doctors, but when I went out, they were gone. I walked a bit and reached the reception. It was completely empty, closed. I went back and headed to the end of the hallway. There was a wooden door ajar. Snoring was coming from inside. I opened it and turned on the light. The doctor was sleeping on a couch and stopped snoring as the room lit up. He turned to me and asked if I was okay. "The lady, she won't stop crying," I said. "She seems to be in a lot of pain." He got up, removed the blanket he was covered with, and accompanied me back to the room. When we got there, he turned on the light and there was nobody. He just said, "I'll sleep here. We'll sleep with the light on, okay?" That's all he said, and in my innocence, I didn't understand what was happening. I lay down on the bed facing the wall and he lay down on the adjacent one. I didn't hear anything else, and in the morning, while waiting for the officer who had said he would come for me, he just confirmed there was nobody else in the clinic with us that night. My uncle was bruised but okay. One of my brothers got hurt the worst. He broke a leg, but nothing serious. It took me months to tell them what happened to me that night in that place. A patient came into the ER in bad shape, barely breathing, yet still lucid, but only for a short time. He was young, no more than 20 years old, and had very advanced terminal testicular cancer. Surprisingly, he grabbed my arm with his bony hands with unusual firmness. His nails were long and sharp, hurting me, but I tried to hide the pain his fingers caused. "You're going to get better," I said to him. "I don't want to die, doctor. I'm scared," he replied desperately. I called the therapist and introduced the patient, who was getting worse by the minute. "What's his prognosis? What can we do?" I asked. "There's nothing to be done. He's dying," they responded. It was then I realized the patient still had a tight grip on my forearm, as if he were mummified. "Don't go, doctor," he pleaded. "I'm not going anywhere," I responded. The patient continued to look at me, his eyes dimming as his breathing slowed down and then suddenly stopped. However, his hand remained clamped on my forearm and his nails dug into my skin. With the help of a nurse, I managed to free myself. I saw the marks from his nails on my skin, red and almost bleeding. After completing the death paperwork, I went to rest for a bit. Suddenly, I woke up feeling a hand firmly clenching my forearm, scratching it. It was dark and I couldn't see anything, but the pressure was real and painful. Instinctively, I grabbed my phone and tried to light up the area with the screen. The pressure vanished suddenly. There was no one near me, but the marks were there, fresh, recent, almost bleeding. A man who looked like a beggar timidly knocked on the ER door. The nurse attended to him, registered him, and led him into the consultation room. He was having trouble breathing, coughing, and had a fever. The examination didn't tell me much, so I ordered an X-ray. The radiology technician asked him to stand over the X-ray table and took the X-ray. She went into the dark room to develop it and felt cold and scared, as if someone was breathing on her neck. The breathing felt very strong. She quickly left the dark room and found the patient was gone. It was impossible for him to hide anywhere. The door was locked from the inside. The patient had literally vanished. Feeling even more scared, she ran back to the ER. We called the police just in case, and searched everywhere but found nothing. We were left wondering what had happened. We noted the incident in the logbook at 3:15 a.m. Early in the morning, the security manager arrived and heard what had happened. "Let's check the cameras," he suggested. We all watched the recordings attentively until the estimated time came. The nurse is seen opening the door, but no one enters. I appear in the hallway talking to no one, gesturing alone. At no point does another person appear. The technician is seen opening the X-ray room door and talking, but there's no one there. We were silent. We didn't say anything. We didn't want to seem crazy, yet we all saw and interacted with the ghost patient. The cameras didn't record him, only our eyes or our imagination did. My grandma, may she rest in peace, had many health complications and illnesses during her last years of life. I remember I was one of the few grandchildren old enough to visit her in her hospital bed, even if just for a little while. Once, something very strange happened that my dad and my aunts chalked up to the delirium caused by her illness, but I'm not so sure. When she was alone in the hospital room, which had 2 other beds, she would call the nurse, telling her that a lady was floating around the room, positioning herself right above her, looking down from the ceiling. The nurse didn't pay much attention to it, though she did mention it to us when we came to visit, perhaps to prepare us for any hallucinations and nonsensical words she might say. When we entered, there was already an older lady in the bed next to hers, with a family member and a nurse present. As I mentioned, the others didn't pay much attention to what the nurse previously said, but I did ask her about the events that happened to her, even though I was advised not to. I took the chance to ask her when one of my aunts left the room to let someone else in. Here's what caught my attention the most. When she described the woman, she said she was very, very dark-skinned with curly, fluffy hair, like that of an African woman, but the hair was absolutely white. At that moment, another aunt came in and asked me to leave so someone else could enter. I left, and as I headed to the waiting room, the nurse from the bed next to us, a very young girl I hadn't seen before, approached me. So young, in fact. She looked almost my age. "I couldn't help overhearing what your grandma told you. Don't take it the wrong way, but can I tell you something?" I said yes. "Well, it might just be a coincidence, but the lady your grandma described, the one she says she saw, is identical to a lady who was in that room for a month and a half until she passed away about a week ago." For a moment I thought maybe your grandma had seen her in life and was now hallucinating her, but I just confirmed here in the record that the lady died several days before your grandma arrived. I was speechless, didn't know how to respond, and I think the nurse realized she might have shared details she shouldn't have. "Well," she said, "I just wanted to share that with you so you don't think your grandma is going crazy or anything. We see a lot of things like this in the hospital, and it's good that you believe her." My grandma lived several more years and never again mentioned seeing anything strange or having hallucinations. She was always sure that what she had seen in that room was real,